One of the things I love about the expansions for Dark Souls 2 is that we get to see a grand vista of the place we're about to explore, and Brume Tower is no different. I love seeing those vast lava fields that are far below, and the structure of Brume Tower itself is very interesting and appealing. I can't really think of any other structure in the Dark Souls series that has that essence of verticality like Brume Tower does. That's not to say there isn't any vertical exploration in the Dark Souls series, there's tons of it, but in terms of the overall design of a location, I think Brume Tower is pretty unique, so that's cool. And I love how there's ash spread all across this structure, and there's very good reason for ash being spread all over. We picked up a smelter wedge at the beginning before we crossed that great chain, and the smelter wedge reads, "An iron wedge forged in this land destroys the Ashen Idol. The Ashen Idol is of great consequence to Nadalia, who, having renounced her flesh, entrusts her very being to it." And Nadalia is a critical figure in the story of the Old Iron King, namely the story of Brume Tower. She does have ties to the Old Iron King, but not in a way you would expect. And that's one of the things I find very cool about her story, in that there's another man she drew the attention of, and one who would entrust his very soul and being to her, essentially. But we'll talk more about that later. Right now I want to talk a little bit more about Nadalia. You actually get fragments of her souls from every Ashen Idol you get rid of, and in order to get the entire soul, you have to destroy all 20 Ashen Idols. The fragment of the Soul of Nadalia reads, "Soul of Nadalia, bride of Ash, who renounced her flesh and wandered Brume Tower. When Nadalia came to this land, the king she sought was no longer there. Dispirited, she forsook her own soul and clung to the heirlooms of the old king. This is only a fragment of a soul, and cannot be used in this state." And that right there explains how she kind of missed her window to meet with the Old Iron King. By the time Nadalia came around to Brume Tower, the Old Iron King had long since passed on, or more accurately, had become that great beast we fought in the bowels of the Iron Keep. But much like Alana in the Kingdom of Shulva, we're seeing these patterns of these queens seeking out kings of these great kingdoms. And Nadalia wanted to be one such queen, but little did she know the kingdom she wanted to rule over would be brought low. And so, once she arrived at Brume Tower and learned the truth, she renounced her flesh and kind of split her soul, fragmented her soul into 20 different pieces that would grant power all across Brume Tower. What I find really neat is that whenever you destroy an Ashen Idol, it will speak. I have the hardest time understanding what they're saying, but the dialogue usually talks about how she had been waiting for someone and how she was waiting for someone to come back to her. She'd been waiting for so long. In that regard, it makes you think someone has already come to Brume Tower and has claimed her love and has kind of quote-unquote become her king for the queen she wants to be, or has at least sworn loyalty to her, because it's through Nadalia's powers that all these Ashen warriors have arisen to fight us. Even though her very soul is scattered throughout all the Ashen Idols, they still hold great power through their pyromancy, through the abilities they give to all the enemies we fight here. She is not to be messed with, and I'm kind of glad we don't fight her in her prime, because I feel like she would be a very powerful and very scary individual to fight. Because even in her weakened state like this, she can be a bit of a handful. So I think Nadalia is a very interesting character, and as I said, she's kind of the critical part of the Brume Tower story. The other figure is the one I've kind of been hinting at, the one who came and kind of swore loyalty to her. He actually has ties back to the original Dark Souls 2 game, and we learn a little bit about him in the base game, and many players wondered what happened to this character. Well, those questions were answered with the release of this expansion, and the reveal for that answer is quite awesome, I have to say. In my opinion, the possessed armors are one of the trickier enemies of the Crown of the Old Iron King expansion. They kind of have a somewhat unpredictable moveset, and they do hit rather hard, and they can also attack you from a distance as well as up close. So they're not to be trifled with. They might go down a bit easy, but they can hurt you if you let them. Their sword reads, "Straight sword wielded by possessed armor, has a heated blade imbued with fire. These suits of armor were once decorations, until the black fog ruling the tower seized control of them." Through her control over the ash, and in this black fog that is mentioned in the lore, Nadalia was able to reanimate corpses and bring to life inanimate objects like suits of armor. So again, she was a very powerful individual. She essentially made Brume Tower a death trap, and only the strongest individuals could ever hope to reach the bottom of this tower, because that is where we're ultimately proceeding. I think it's a neat twist on conventions, because usually you start at the bottom of the tower and work your way up, while in Brume Tower, you start at the top, and in order to get to the true final boss of the area, you have to work your way all the way down. So I think that's a really cool idea. But fighting enemies like the possessed armors does make it a bit more challenging. I actually find the Fume Sorcerers to be one of the more interesting enemies of this expansion, and I'm kind of a little sad that we don't learn more about them, because I really like their design and the lore behind them. And we do learn some of this lore through their armor set, which reads, "Robes worn by Fume Sorcerers. After the old Iron King sunk into the lava, scores of men were dispatched to this land to tap the replete stores of iron. But soon they lost their nerve when faced with the Child of Dark, and all but the most steadfast of them became servants of the Black Fog." I find this lore really fascinating for two reasons. One, because it shows that the servants of the old Iron King tried to continue on with the kingdom, or at least continue on in their own selfish ways, once they saw that their king was done for after he transformed into a hideous beast and sunk into the lava below the Iron Keep. So I think it's neat that we learn more about the aftermath of the old Iron King and what happened to his servants and his followers after that whole debacle happened. But of course, by the time they arrived at Brume Tower, Nadalia had already set up shop, and again, I know I'm kind of repeating myself here, but this shows kind of how scary powerful she was in her prime, and still is to a certain degree. This also confirms that Nadalia is another child of the dark, much like Alana was. She is a fragment of the Abyss, given form and a soul, essentially. And only the most powerful of the old Iron King's servants who came to Brume Tower survived the onslaught that she prepared for them, and they ultimately became servants of her, and became the Fume Sorcerers. So I think that's a really neat side story we learn about the Sorcerers, and how they once were servants to the old Iron King, but now they serve another ruler, one who might be slightly less benevolent, but they are intensely loyal to all the same. I always like in the Dark Souls games when the enemies of each area kind of have a little story behind them, or we can kind of piece together why that enemy might be in this location. And I think they did a good job of that throughout Dark Souls 2, with a couple of exceptions, but in general, the enemy placement is very cool from a storytelling perspective, and the Fume Sorcerers and Possessed Armors of the Brume Tower are another great example of that. And with this item, we discover one of the true sources of the old Iron King's power, the Scorching Iron Scepter. A scorching hot iron scepter, used to activate contraptions by transferring heat to Brume Tower. When the old Iron King wrested his dilapidated region from the Kingdom of Ven, the act required all the resources the enfeebled lord could muster. But with the discovery of this iron-producing miracle, he was reborn as a powerful leader. Now we know from previous lore descriptions that the old Iron King did start out as a weak and, as they say, enfeebled lord. He wasn't a strong individual by any means towards the beginning. But with the help of Sir Lon, who we've already talked about, and the Scorching Iron Scepter, he became to be known as the mighty ruler, the old Iron King. What I find really interesting about this item, though, is that the fact that it says that it helps produce the iron, so the great wealth and strength that the old Iron King amassed pretty much all goes back to this one scepter. It was through this powerful artifact that he was able to essentially achieve everything that he did. There is a magical nature to this item, and it's through this that he was able to use Brume Tower as his main source of harvesting iron throughout the land. It's kind of neat to find out one of the great sources of the king's power, and what helped him on his rise to become the mighty monarch he would soon become.